Maybe let's get started. Welcome to the last stream of frameworkless.js. The last of the first 6. So my plan originally was to create 6 streams, and then to see where I want to take it after that. So this is part 6. This is the end. Afterwards, I think I might do some more streams for supplementary content, like, for example, learning about authentication or how to implement, lots of other stuff, HTTP2, for example, in your apps, or some of those other things. So those might come up on a different stream, later on. But I would really actually kind of love to hear from you about what you want to see. So if you feel like helping out by telling me what it is that you want to learn about to watch us do on live stream, then just let me know. Because it's kind of hard for me to guess also. I mean, I know that there's some things like authentication that are always like super confusing or super annoying things to do. But I'm not sure. Maybe somebody has a more esoteric suggestion of what we could look at. But yeah, this is the last stream. Today is Tuesday, August the 20th. This is it. And just probably wait around for one more minute just to make sure that we're 1 minute past the hour, and then we can get started. But today we're going to look at the actual meat of the product. So we built everything around this Remind Us product, everything possible so far, except for the actual functionality of sending the emails. So it's kind of nice leaving it to last because it's actually not very difficult. We've created quite a sophisticated app so far. So to build the added functionality of actually sending out the emails is not very difficult now that we have all of this stuff in place. So, all right, maybe when we're done watching this awesome GIF of Arrested Development, I'll move on. So a recap of what we've done up to this point. In the first stream, we built a Node.js app that serves the public folder out of basically static files out of the public folder using create server, the HTTP functionality built into Node.js. In the second stream, we not only implemented the public directory, but we also added dynamic routing and we added templates. The templates use handlebar syntax, so they're very simple, very similar to Vue.js uses mustache-like, for example, templating, so it's very similar to that. It's very similar to anything that uses mustache, essentially, because handlebars is a flavor of mustache. And we also wrote a data parser that then I created a package out of because it's quite a complex module. And you can either choose to rewrite it yourself or to install the package. So we wrote that. We connected up an SQL database, so we have a Postgres database up and running somewhere in the cloud with a whole bunch of what we call actions. So they're basically just a architectural thing that we call actions, and they're essentially just things that the database does contained in one function rather than writing out an SQL query every time. And last time around, we built a nice pipeline so that when we're working with front-end assets, they're not going to be things that are like just static files that you save and then refresh your everything. So you can use PostCSS, or you can use Node Sass, or any of those other libraries, or any of the other niceties that come with additional sort of pre-compiled CSS syntax and JavaScript. We added Babel, so you can write modern JavaScript and it'll work in some lower-end browsers. But yeah, moving along. So that's what we built so far. And just to take a look at what we've produced, it's this one right here, Remind Us. This is the product we're building. So it schedules an email for you to send to yourself in the future. So you say the email that you want to send to, you schedule when you'd like to send it on, say, the 18th of September, and you type in a message, submit, and it schedules that email for the 18th of September. So it's very simple, it's super clean and super easy to use, and this is kind of intended because we didn't want to add too much complicated stuff here in order to, make the tutorial as simple as possible. And I kind of want to go through, since this last stream, what we built this all for. So this is, for example, a conversation I had with someone that saw one of my posts on LinkedIn. This is a guy I used to work with. He's a developer in Netherlands. and he's working at a large sort of company in the Netherlands, and they're implementing a lot of they have large teams, and the large teams are kind of moved from project to project sometimes. So it's kind of good to use a framework because it's a common language that everyone can speak. But you can kind of read his description of how it feels to sometimes work with this stuff. Sometimes we have this bloat basically of frameworks and polyfills and things that connect polyfills and frameworks to other frameworks, or it's quite a large tool chain we're working on now. And sometimes it creates problems a lot. And so basically I think it's just a reinforcing of the lesson here, which is that you don't always need a framework. So if you are building something really simple, you're not building, a banking application or an application to, something super complicated like filling out your taxes. Maybe you don't need a framework. Maybe you can just build a Node.js app with some simple JavaScript and some simple CSS. A framework is a structural, architectural decision that you make building an app. And if you make it blindly, if you just think, oh yeah, React's the next hot thing, or Vue.js, or Svelte, or whatever it is, you are doing yourself a disservice, because you really need to figure out why you're using that framework. How does it make your life easier? What is it that it's actually doing for you? And a lot of times, it's very easy to install something like React and think, yeah, it does a bunch of magic behind the scenes. But that's actually not good enough. If you don't understand the magic, then it's not really magic. It's just abstracting away functionality that perhaps it would be helpful for you to understand as well. Like, for instance, with React, it's a very fast rendering engine in the browser, and also potentially on mobile as well with React Native. But the thing is, you have to also understand how React works in order to optimize it. So optimize how it uses the DOM, how it schedules itself to redraw or re-render the page or a certain component or a set of components. If you don't understand that stuff, building a React app might not be the best course of action unless your absolute objective there is just to learn. And yeah, this guy, for example, I don't want to call him out or something. That's why we used a pseudonym. I did ask him permission to use this. But basically, he's just having a hard time sometimes making different frameworks work together, and that's something that we want to avoid, because it's not fun sitting there fighting with a framework instead of writing features or fixing bugs, and instead fighting with all of these different modules that's supposed to work together cleanly. But also, that being said, don't avoid frameworks just because you think that, you watch this course and I'm harping about how frameworks are bad. I don't think they're bad. There's a lot of projects I've used frameworks for. I'm using React Native in 2 different projects right now, and I'm using Vue.js in another one at the moment. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that if you need to use them, and if you don't. That's as simple as that. If you don't need, actually, what's great about Redux, so this is the pattern for, Redux, often used with React, is in their documentation, there's actually a very clear page that says, do you need Redux? Because Redux is a very complex pattern for complex applications. So sometimes you actually don't need Redux. You just need to use simple contextual store or, just pass down props. It's really quite simple to read document, and I really encourage you to have a read through it, the Redux docs, if you're going to use Redux or anything else for that matter. Anyways, that's enough of my spiel. Let's move on. And what we're going to do today. So we are going to finish up our app by connecting up the app to an email server. So we're going to use Mailgun. It's a transactional email service provider. So it gives us an API key, and you can set up a domain in order to send emails from it. You can use, there's tons of others, Mandrill, which is the one that is, I think, owned by MailChimp. There's another one called SendGrid. There's a ton of them that are super popular to use. Mailgun is just my chosen one. But yeah, they all have similar kind of code that you'll have to write. So just use it intelligently. Yeah, Mailgun is just as good as all the others. So we're going to write also a background task, a cron job, if you will, a script that will run in the background and send the emails to people that schedule them. And finally, we're going to deploy our app to Heroku. Now, maybe actually one of these future courses that we should do is actually how to do your own server configuration and deploy on your own. But at the moment, we're going to use Heroku because it's super easy and simple. And I'll get into why and what with Heroku later. But let's not waste any more time and actually get started building. So the first thing we want to do is, let's see, open up our repository here. So I'm starting from the previous session. Just do a quick git pull in case I missed anything. Yeah, everything seems okay. So the first thing I want to do is install the Mailgun.js module. So this is a simple little module that wraps around their API calls and allows us to basically just input an API key and just use a send functionality. That's all it really does. So that's what we're going to do. Here we go. It's installing the module. And the next thing is, if you don't have a Mailgun account, you can go to mailgun.com. It's really quite simple. You set up an account. I think they have a free tier where you can send out emails for yourself. The first 10,000 emails free, which is actually a great thing for a developer because you can test out lots of emails and make sure that they're working before you actually have to pay. So here, for instance, in the domain settings, I have the domain Remindist set up already. So we're going to be using that domain to send stuff. And the other thing is, if you do set up Mailgun, you will probably want to set up MX records and DKIM records. What are those? Well, MX records tell your, basically our domain DNS record that say where your email server is. So in the case of Mailgun, it'll be at mailgun.org or so forth. But in the case of Gmail, it's a different server and so forth. MX records, it's just a way for your domain to be able to communicate where and how its emails are sent. And DKIM is a type of, shall we say, authentication or authorization framework that's being used by a lot of email inboxes and also a lot of senders, like Mailgun, for example. And what it does is it allows you to prove that you have the right to send from a given domain. So, for instance, if you really wanted to send an email, you could spoof the from address to be at gmail.com. So you could send it from mike@gmail.com if you wanted to. But because you don't have a DKIM record with Mailgun or any other provider, that might potentially trigger warnings in Gmail, in your inbox, or whatever Hotmail or whatever email provider you use. So DKIM records are a way for email providers to verify that the sender does have the right to send the email and that what you're looking at is not spam. So make sure that you create those DKIM records if you do decide to set up transactional emails through Mailgun or SendGrid or any of the other email providers. Or indeed, if you set up your own email server as well, you'll have to create DKIM records if you really want to send emails properly and that don't end up, with warnings or worse, sent to spam. And now just a thought of how we're going to set this up. Well, we're already using handlebars for our views templates, so why not use it in our emails as well? So to get started, let's run these commands. I realize there's a small error here. It's supposed to say the emails directory before the touch. So you're supposed to say emails index.js, emails reminder.hbs. So let's run these commands and I'll show what's supposed to change. So we create an email directory and now we want to create a emails index.js and we want to create a emails reminder.hbs. So these two files are essentially going to be what is sending our emails. So reminder.hbs is going to contain the content for our emails and index.js is going to be basically a big set of utilities that we're going to use in order to trigger the sends. So let's move on to that. So here's the content of the email. It's super simple here. You notice here that I have a 3- notation. So I'm going to use this to basically switch between the subject and the content of the email. So this top part, this line 1 here, is going to be the subject of the email, once again, and the bottom part is going to be the message itself. So that's what we're going to be using. You can, of course, do this in a different way, but I think this is the quickest and simplest solution. So in our code, we're just going to have to look for this 3 dash notation, split on that, and then the first part is the subject, and the second part is the contents of the email. And the next part is let's check out the loading the actual email files in. So this is the contents of the index.js file. So in here, let's have a read through. First thing we're doing is we're grabbing the read file sync function from the file system module from Node.js. Second thing is we're grabbing handlebars, because handlebars is what we're going to use to render the emails. And glob, if you haven't watched me excessively use glob before, I'll explain it now. Glob is just a way to match a file pattern to, for example, looking for all files in a folder given a certain pattern. So what we are looking for is in anything in the emails directory that has an HBS extension. So that's what we're doing. And then last session, we wrote some handlebar helpers, or we wrote a file, I should say, that has a handlebar helper in it. And it's a time ago function. So it essentially formats our, using the time ago module, our time, instead of a ugly date stamp, it formats it as 5 days ago or 3 minutes ago and so forth. So we want to use that in our email. As you'll see here, I'm using the time ago helper to format the created at date for the reminder. So yeah, basically I figure why not use those same helpers in our emails as in our templates. So I loaded them in here. The next thing is we're creating a mails object, and then we're using the glob functionality in order to import all of these different files. So in our case, there's just one email, but maybe in the future we want to send multiple emails, so it's actually kind of nice doing it this way. You can, of course, just include the email by itself, so you can just import using the read file sync method, import the reminder.hbs yourself. But this is just as easy to do, and you can do it once and it's done. So what we're actually doing here is we're grabbing the file path of the email file. And next we are, sorry about that inception. The next thing we're doing is we are splitting up the path, and we're figuring out the name of the email based on the file name. So in this case, it'll be reminder. Then we're importing the contents of the file, and as you see, we split it up on the dash dash dash. What that means is the first part will be, we're destructuring it as well. So the first part will be the subject, and the second part will be the body. And then finally, we are adding to this mails object by specifying the key, which will be a reminder, and we're providing the subject and the body as properties within that key. And that's essentially it for importing the emails. So now we need to figure out a way to actually compile the emails and send them. So oopsies, I keep doing that by accident. So the compile function. Basically, we want to be able to create the email, generate it, and we also want to send it. And I like to break it up into two different chunks, a compile function and a send function, because maybe you want to one day build in a functionality to preview the emails. Maybe you want to output the emails into your console for some kind of testing. And you don't necessarily want to send and compile at the same time. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive actions. You might do one and not the other, and so forth. So for this, we're just going to create two different functions. A compile, which takes the email. As you see here, it grabs the stuff from the mail object, and it generates the message and the subject based on the the handlebar templates that we provided earlier, right? So let's do that next. So here's our compile function. And just to go through it a little bit, it takes an email name and a context variable. It grabs the, basically specifies a mail based on the mail's object and the email name. So in order to trigger this, you would say, compile reminder, like so, and then you would provide a context of how to send it. If the email is not found, we throw an error. Otherwise, we compile the body and the subject. So they're two separate things. As you see here in our subject, we also want to use handlebars. So we have to compile them separately as two different things. We compile the subject and the body, and then finally we specify who the email is sent from. So that also means that we should set some new environment variables. And so the ones that we need are going to be the, one sec, let me open that up. We'll need the Mailgun API key. We'll need the Mailgun domain, and I'll explain these in one sec. The app name, which we already have, remindest, and Mailgun send email from. So 3 new sort of environment variables. And you'll want to put these in your env file, not in your env sample. I'm just putting them here as an example. My env file already contains them, but if I open that file, you will, of course, see my environment variables, including API keys, which would be foolish of me. So anyways, fill those in your env file. What are those, actually? If you go into your dashboard for Mailgun and you look into the settings, you will find that there's an API security tab here, and your API keys happen to be here. So you can fill those in. The Mailgun domain is the domain that you've actually set up to use with Mailgun. The app name, we've already been through. And Mailgun send email from is a variable that specifies what the email address should be that you're sending from. So in this case, remindest, this is the fallback bot at the domain that I've set up. And it can have this format, which is just the name, and then after a lesser than and a greater than bracket, you put the actual email address, or it can just be a plain email address. Either way, it works. Then we are creating a compile context. Now, just a refresher of what this is. This is the thing we pass into handlebars that renders the handlebars as values. And here we, of course, compile and add the context to the subject template. And the body is compiled here. So from that, we create this nice little message object. We have a from, we have a to, we have a subject, and HTML content of the email. We have these two things, which are just Mailgun variables. So O-tracking just says that we want to track opens, and O-tag is just a way for us to track which email is being sent and delivered and so forth. And then we return this message. So that's our compile function. And it's pretty straightforward when you just look at it, I think. And then the last step is we, of course, want to also be able to send it via the Mailgun API. So to do that, let's start with the top here. We want to include the Mailgun.js module, first of all, which we do here. Then we want to import the environment variables that we need to work. Then basically, this module is useless without an API key and a domain. So we will throw an error here if they're not set. Then we initiate a client. So you can look at the Mailgun.js library documentation if you like. Basically, you pass in the API key, the domain, and a username, which is, in this case, API. And this is the client. So this is the sort of the instance of Mailgun that you'll be able to send all of your stuff with. And here you see the send function. So in comes the email, and then we, in a try-catch block, wrap just some small proprietary, or not proprietary, but library code for Mailgun. So client, which is the Mailgun client instance. Then we do messages, which is, and then we chain on send. and we await that because it's asynchronous. And yeah, if anything happens, we spit out an error, but that's pretty straightforward. And lastly, we of course want to export these because we don't want to just forget them. Let me put that at the bottom here. It's a nice conventional place to put exports at the bottom. So I'll just move this below so that compile and send are next to each other. All right. So now we have a completed sort of email library that we can use anywhere in our app. So anywhere we include the emails library or the emails file, you'll have this functionality of compile and send. So speaking of which, we need to be able to send the emails. Well, the one way that is probably the easiest to do in an MVP sort of app, because it's super simple and super, not complicated, is to use a cron job or a script or a background task, whatever you want to call it. So to that end, let's create that. We already have one task that we can run in our bin folder, and that was to initialize our database. We don't want to do anything with the database this time. We just want to create a reminders folder in the bin folder now. Oopsies. We want to create a file called send in that folder. And this chmod command here will allow us to execute that script as executable, as it can run itself essentially. So here we are. Here's that send file, and you might remember from last time around we need to put what's called a hashbang at the top. The hashbang is language mode. I'm just going to change this to JavaScript. The hashbang tells your shell how to run this file, because you notice it doesn't have a file extension on it. That's just my own personal convention. You can put a file extension on it and maybe even ignore the hashbang. But yeah, hashbang is how that does everything. So the first thing we want to do is we want to see if this file is being run with environment variable database URL, and otherwise we need to import .env, which will grab our env file with hopefully the database URL in it. The next thing we need to do is do some imports. So the first thing we need to import is our DB initializer that we wrote a few sessions ago. Here we go. So that was just this simple little Postgres pool that we initialize. So that's what DB will be. And then we import our beautiful functions that we just wrote, compile and send, from, you'll notice, the email directory that we just created today, a couple of minutes ago. And the next step is that we actually need to, you can copy and paste this function basically, but the run function. So this is where the meat of the entire script will be. So the first thing that we do is we create a date. So the date being now. Then we set the UTC hours, the minutes, the seconds, and the milliseconds on the date, which means that this will be at exactly the moment when the clock shifts to the next day. So this is the very beginning of that day. So if it's the 20th of August, this will be the 20th of August at 0 seconds, 0 milliseconds, 0 minutes, 0 hours. So basically right at the turn of midnight, essentially. Then we just output some console log just so we know what's happening. And then we will grab all of the reminders that are outstanding for us, where the send at date matches our now date, right? Then we output how many emails are going to be delivered this time around. And if there are no emails, then we'll just exit because there's nothing to do after this. Otherwise, we will send out reminders. So what we're doing here is like you saw, we have an SQL query up here where we grabbed all of the rows that match this SQL query that matches the date of now. And now we're looping through them, and we are compiling an email using our compile function from the email little script that we just built, that's this one, we are compiling the email called reminder, and we're passing to it the reminder. All right. Then we are sending the message. So the message here, we're calling the send function that we just wrote here. And then the last step is in our reminder file, we specifically call out that now that this message is sent, it's been self-destructed in our database. So we, as our last move, we delete the email from our database because we don't want to have people's reminders from before. We don't want to collect that kind of data. Not to go off on a privacy spree or anything like that, but I really think that if you no longer have use for data, you delete it. So in this case, old reminders of people, maybe it's best to remove them unless you have an explicit purpose to keep them. So that's what we're doing. And then finally, we resolve our promise, which is what this thing is. And the last part basically is just a way to specify what to do if when the promise resolves. So in this case, we are calling process exit, which is just basically saying so long, goodbye, auf Wiedersehen to the process, so it exits. And in the case of an error, we also exit, but we pass in this number 2 here. And this is essentially any error code that is like a 2 or so means error, because if it's not a 0 process exit code, then you know that we're complaining about an error. And we also output the error here. So if we go ahead and run this, so let's try. We have to save first. So I'll make this bigger for a second while we run it. Send. So here we are, running mailer job for the 20th of August. There's 0 outstanding emails and no emails need sending, so let's get out of here. That's essentially it. And now all we need to do is schedule this job to run every time we need it. But, just to be on the safe side, let's make sure to test this functionality. So to do so, let's just do a clean run through the whole app. All right, so we're going to load up the app. Localhost 1234. And I'm going to schedule an email to myself, test@feev.io, and I'm going to schedule it for the 20th of August. Hello, this is a test. La 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 la. Submit this. Right. So now we have a test email to figure out how to send. So now if we run theoretically our reminders thing, it will send. Here we are. And as you see here, our script successfully queued the email with the remindest domain, and it said one outstanding email found. So in a few minutes, I should receive this email. So I'll get a little notification here on the right, and then we can open it and bask in the glory of what it is. But not yet. We have to wait for it to arrive. Oh, here it is. There. Look at this magical thing. Hi there, test.feev.io. Hello, this is a test. And a description, we are receiving this email because blah, blah, blah. Now, before I fully launch Remindest, I'm going to make a nicer email template. And this is another possibility for an extra bit of content that we can do at a different time on a different stream. Because this email is obviously very basic, and it'll probably work in all browsers, but it's not a very attractive email to receive. So I might do a session on how to style emails. What are the drawbacks of using HTML email? What are the pluses? And how to use some of those templates properly, how to design your own templates, and so forth. So anyways, right now we can satisfy ourselves that the reminder mechanism of our app works perfectly and be happy with that. Right, so then we should focus on how to schedule this to execute every day, right? Well, the first part you can do is you can schedule it as a cron job. Cron job is essentially a Linux executable process that you can run. A cron job is something that is scheduled using the cron syntax. So you see here 09 star star star. If you don't know what a cron syntax looks like, what's a great website resource is crontab.guru. So here it explains very clearly what a cron tab scheduling syntax looks like. So the first parameter is minutes, then hours, then a day, then the month, and the day of the week. So yeah, there's other certain parts to it that you should keep in mind, and then it's followed by the script that you want to run. So in this case, it'll be our script to send emails that we just wrote. I'm not going to go too much into this because this is perhaps something we should discuss when we're dealing with setting up your own server environment, because you'll have to make sure that cron job has permissions, is injecting environment variables properly, and so forth. What we're going to do is, because we're deploying with Heroku, we don't actually need to worry about this particular aspect of it. So I'm going to move forward to the Heroku way of deploying. So a little bit of Heroku. If you're a web developer and you haven't heard of Heroku, first of all, that's a pretty crazy thing because it's pretty well known. It's a hosting platform. It's actually hosted by Amazon Web Services, and it's a layer on top of Amazon Web Services, as far as I know still. And they have this methodology that they use for all of their hosting. It's the 12-factor app. The 12-factor app is essentially an app that is apart from its configuration and apart from a lot of the other things that could get in the way of a clean app. So I would really recommend you read about the 12-factor app if you haven't already. I think I mentioned it a few times during the course of the stream, but go ahead and look it up. It has a free tier, which is, I think it gives you about 500 hours a month of free dyno time, free hosting time. So it's great for tinkering around like what we're doing. They have a number of free add-ons. So for example, I'm not going to pay any money to them for the Postgres database that we're using because their Postgres database gives you 10,000 free records. So I can host the database there for free and not pay a cent until I'm actually making money off of my product. So it's kind of a nice hack to use Heroku because, you of course have to pay for the hosting, but a lot of things come for free. In the long run, also, if you want to learn to do the deployments yourself, or if you're extremely cost conscious, like maybe you don't want to put a lot of money into this app, which is totally understandable, or any app for that matter, you probably want to move away from Heroku because, especially at scale, because those Heroku costs can really compound. So I would highly recommend that if you reach that scale of where you need to have several dynos at once, maybe it's nice to look at other alternatives if you're cost conscious. But one thing I will say for Heroku is it takes away all of the need to do all of this fancy DevOps work. You don't have to worry about your hosting going down. Heroku is a pretty robust platform that stops that from happening. And they really do take a lot of responsibility, and they have a really great support team. So they didn't pay me to do this, by the way. If they want to pay me, that's fine, but they're not paying me to harp their horn. I'm just saying this from personal experience. So in order to deploy the app, we're going to go through this a small sort of selection of steps. You need to create a Heroku account if you don't already have one. We're going to create the app. We're going to provision several add-ons like a Postgres database and the Heroku scheduler. And if you have a GitHub repo for this project or the project that you're building, you can use that in order to make sure that it gets deployed. Otherwise, you can use the Heroku CLI. You can do a little bit more work on your part to set it up, but it's just as easy. And the next thing is, if you want it to run on a custom domain name, you'll have to create a CNAME record matching your app under Heroku. So let's get on and do that. So we'll open up Heroku here. And I'm going to quickly deploy this app. So here I'm going to create a new app. It's going to be called Fev Remindest Demo. So the closest region to me is Europe, so I'm going to choose Europe. There we go. Creating my app. So I have a GitHub account and I have a GitHub repo, so I'm going to want to deploy from there. And my repo name is Remindist. So I'm going to go ahead and connect this up. And again, this is under the deploy tab. And I want to deploy probably the master branch, but in this case, we're going to deploy stage 6 because that's the code from today. But before we do that, let's go ahead and add some stuff to it. So first of all, we need to add a Postgres database. Now the tiers for this are, you can read about the pricing and stuff, but the basic tier is free, or the dev tier is free. Like I said, it's 10,000 records, and then you have to pay or wipe those records out. But in our case, we're building an app that destroys records after it finishes sending, so unless it gets a huge traffic spike, I think it'll probably be okay. So we're going to go ahead and provision that. Next thing is we need to add, I personally like to use Papertrail. Papertrail is a, they once again also have free and paid plans, but it's a way to stream your logs somewhere. So it's a great little way to traverse your logs for your app. So I would recommend Papertrail. And the last thing we need to do is the scheduler. So the Heroku scheduler does just fine. It's exactly what we need, and it's for free. So you don't have to pay anything for this app at the moment. All right, so next thing we need to do is we need to set up some environment variables, I think. We have a database URL. Let's look at our env samples here. So we don't need to set the port. Heroku does that automatically. We do need to set the app name, so we'll just go ahead and do that, and we'll do remindist and write demo here just because it's a little more helpful to understand. Then we need to do a Mailgun API key, Mailgun domain, so Mailgun API key. And I don't have that on my, on hand, so I will do that later. Mailgun domain, remind.ist, and Mailgun send from. Now here's where we can enter whatever we want. So testing, test at remind.ist. All right, so we've set up all the configuration necessary for our app. The next step is going to be deploying the stage 6 branch. So let's go ahead and do that. So down here under deploy GitHub branch, I've just checked that. So you have the output here. So it's installing Node modules, like all the dependencies needed for your app. It's using I believe the engines from our package.json file. So we use async and await and a number of other new language features. So we actually probably want to run Node higher than 10 because that's where a lot of these features landed. So that's why I specified here that I want Node.js version greater than or equal to 12. It's the latest one, and I'm perfectly happy with that. The other thing that Heroku does is as they install your environment using what's called a build pack. And a build pack allows you to install Node.js, NPM, and all your modules and everything before you even get into any of the other commands. And one of the things that it does is since a recent change, it'll run the build script that you specify under scripts here in your package.json. So in my case, it'll run the build CSS and build the JS functionality that we built in the last session. So you'll see here that it was run. So we're running the build. We have a pre-build step. We have the build command, which will run the CSS and JS builders. So yeah, we ran post CSS and browserify, which are the two sort of things that we use for JavaScript and CSS. So our app should be pretty much fully deployed, and you can set up a custom domain here, but here we have our app running on the stock Heroku domain. And here we are. The only thing we still need to do is we need to initialize the database, because if we try to save anything to this database now, it's not going to work. So we're going to run using the Heroku run command, and then we're going to specify our bash, which gives us the shell, Heroku run bash, and we're going to specify the app name that we're running. So in my case, it's fev remindist demo. and this puts you into the environment of the app, the hosting environment of the app. You're inside of what they call dynos. And here we go, connecting up. Okay, so you'll see here that if I do an ls command, this is the root of our app running here. So what I need to do is I need to initialize our database. So for that I need to run bin db init. Right, so that's a command we built a long time ago to initialize our database. And there we go, we've initialized our reminders table. And now we can exit, because we don't have anything else we need to initialize. Right, so this should work. So if I say hello at fev.io, and I set the date for today, and so forth, it'll save. And so the last step we need to do, of course, is we need to set up our cron job, right? So let's open up the scheduler, and here we can specify when we want to run and what we want to run. So create job. We want to run it every day at, let's say, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning, UTC time, when everyone's asleep. Or maybe because they're emails, maybe people would prefer them in their inbox. So maybe let's send it at 12 noon as a nice reminder. Or you know what? 9 o'clock, because maybe somebody sent themselves a work reminder, right? So maybe that's a good thing to do. So the command we want to run is bin reminders send, right? And that matches our repositories file here, bin reminders send. And we save the job. So every day this job will be run at 9 a.m. UTC time daily. Also, time zones is another topic we should discuss, because of course this is UTC time, so it'll always send out at 9 o'clock UTC time. But if you wanted to send out at 9 o'clock the person's time zone taken into effect, that takes some extra steps and it's a bit more tricky. So maybe that's another session's worth of discussions, but yeah, here we go. Yeah, so that's basically deployed, right? So it's up and running. I will go into the app that I am using for production. That's the Fev Reminders here. So everything is set up in this app. So if I go to remind.ist, this is the app hosted on Heroku. I prefer HTTPS. There we go. So this is essentially the same thing. It's the same deployment stream as the other app. Yeah. So we're done all that, and yeah, that's it. The app is hosted. It works. It schedules emails. You can do it yourself. You can currently schedule emails to yourself. And you have all the source code, so you can check it out and use it as you see fit. I'd like to congratulate you on coming along with me for this awesome, fun ride. We built this app. It's been 6 hours in terms of stream time, but of course it's probably been closer to like, maybe 2 days a week that I work on this. So it's 16 hours a week times 6. So I put in quite a bit of time on this, like over 100 hours. It's been a really fun learning, and I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you got something out of it. So please let me know how it's been. If there's anything you want to know that I didn't fill in, or I didn't specify, or just shoot me a note and let me know how I did. Please do so. As usual, the code is available on GitHub, and the app is running live on remind.ist, so you can always take a look at that. So hit me up on Twitter, or preferably go to the Telegram group, t.me/frameworkless. So, thanks again for joining me, and maybe we'll do more streams at some time soon. But for the moment, goodbye. No.